Thank you, Derek. Thank you to Red Cloud for giving me the opportunity to speak with you here today and present Tonogold. Just a disclaimer, presentation structure is we're going to focus on the opportunity with the 15 minutes we have, and we can, if we've got some time, we'll talk about the company, the management, etc. I took management control of Tonogold back in 2013. I came to America from Australia for a holiday back in 2012, and I haven't been back. Seriously, I just was introduced to the Comstock load and have been following it and strategizing to get control, which we effectively did in January this year by signing an agreement with the current owner. I suppose I've been insulated from Comstock by being in Australia and Africa before that, and therefore didn't have any preconceived ideas on the opportunity, and started looking at it from a unblinkered approach. And I think that a lot of people today that know or think they know Comstock would have some ideas, thoughts, preconceived ideas, which I would ask you to for the next 15 minutes at least, put aside, because I think that there's a lot of misinformation about Comstock and therefore its potential. We're expecting to complete on this transaction at the end of this month. We've got a capital raising to do so, which we'll talk about a little later. We do have until the end of August, and then after that we'll be focused on drilling. The Comstock lode is undoubtedly the highest grade, largest discovery, most important discovery of gold and silver in American history. It was discovered in 1859 and has produced around 20 million ounces, most of which in the first 20 years up to 1880. It was the catalyst that developed San Francisco. It helped fund the Civil War, and as a result, Lincoln declared Nevada a state. And the importance of the Comstock lode at that time was such that the government sent in top geos, engineers, administrative support, drafting, in order to monitor and manage and to record what was actually happening underground. And that today is unbelievable in terms of the available data that we have been able to assess over the last 6 years while trying to get control of Comstock. Now, there's a preconceived idea that the old-timers have mined this out, and that they were clever. They were cleverer than we are, in terms of following and understanding where the ore is, and therefore they mined out all the ore, and therefore there's none left. Now, to an extent that's correct, but what they regarded as ore, compared to what we regard as ore today, is apples and pears. It's completely different. Their cut-off grade, their minimum grade to break even was 50 grams of gold per tonne, 50. Today it's 6. There's a huge gap. What the old-timers left behind as waste would be regarded today as high grade, and I'll go on to that in a minute. But the issues were that the gold price was fixed at $20, their costs were $21, and they could only recover 65% of the metals because of the lack of technology. The gold price today is more than double that it was in the 1800s in real terms. The costs are down 70% because of technology, trucks, loaders, drill rigs, and the like. And there's a reconciliation here of the 50 grams that they required and our 5. And we're looking at the difference. And a lot of mines around the world, the big mines around the world today, like Super Pit, is based on the same premise that the old-timers left waste that we regard as high grade. 20 million ounces, as I mentioned, came from this area. That's a plan. The red is the mapped gold zones, veins. There's three main systems here. The main Comstock lode, you see 19 million ounces of that 20 came from that area. Then you've got the Silver City fault down below. That produced us 600,000 ounces. And then you've got the Occidental lode that reminds me a lot of Fosterville, but we'll come on to that. The previous owner they did a great job in consolidating the tenements, the mining concessions in this area. They were little patchwork concessions, and back in 1985 they started consolidating. They did a great job. Now we have the benefit of a major package of land. But then they focused on Lucerne down here, 600,000, I assume, because they thought that the main zone had been mined out. The issue was that the previous owners aren't miners, they're property developers. And, there's some issues that obviously we identified at an early stage, and we were able to look at the bigger picture and to identify what is likely to be left along that 19 million ounce stretch. That's a 5 kilometre strike length shown as a long section that was actually developed in 1883. The shaded areas are the bonanzas, the plus 50 grams. The lines are the drifts, and we'll come on to that in a minute. Tonogold has 3 kilometres tied up in this transaction. We will own the 3 kilometres that makes up most of that Comstock lode. Previous production, 9 million ounces. That's a lot of ounces, but it only came from 6 million tonnes. The average grade, 72 grams of gold. We've broken down the production from those stopes, those shaded areas. 94 grams of gold, 3 ounces of gold per tonne came from that area. And 2.3 million tonnes at 32 grams an ounce came from the drifts, which recovered 1.6 million ounces of gold after recovery. In fact, the key here isn't the stopes. Although they're the fantastic statistics, they don't really tell us a lot about the potential. But before I go off that subject, I just wanted to highlight that one of the better stopes, highlighted here in red, 108 grams of gold from a million tonnes, 2.3 million ounces came from that area. Now you see there seems to be a southerly structural strike to these bonanzas. And I dug out a report dated 1880 from the mine superintendent of the Belcher mine that highlighted they hit high-grade ore in that location, that location. It gives the coordinates from one shaft to another and the depth. We know exactly where it is. But they hit water. They couldn't cope with the water at the time with the pumps that they had. And after 3 months, they gave up. They just left it. They developed down to a kilometre, these old timers. And at that level, the ore didn't run out. It seemed to be getting better. But the problem was the water and ventilation. They just didn't have the technology to cope, as we have today, with the water and the ventilation that would be required at those depths. So that's why it stopped at 1,000 metres, no other reason. Interestingly, the two faults, we saw the Comstock and the Silver City, where those two meet is exactly where that high-grade intersection is. And to a geologist, that's a really important point. So that's one of our drill targets to begin with. But as I say, I'm not focused on the stoping or the old stopes. Whether there's any more bonanzas, that would be great. Icing on the cake. That's not the main game. The main game is these drifts, drives. Back then, they didn't have drilling. They did not have the drill rigs that we have today. The only way of discovering the 50 grammers was putting shafts down and developing drifts along the ore body, on the hanging wall, footwall, across. And if they found plus 50, they'd mine it. If they didn't, they'd go down 30 metres, and sometimes 60, and do the same. And they kept going down until they hit a bonanza. That distance was what they regarded as the optimum distance, that if there was a bonanza there, they'd hit it either from the top drift or the bottom drift. But once those drifts had been developed, it was a sunk cost. They had to do it. If they didn't do it, they wouldn't find the bonanzas. Once those drifts had been developed, the cost is sunk. The grade required to make the decision to take that material to the surface and have it treated required 24 grams. That paid for the processing costs and the metallurgical losses, and it gave the miner back a little cash to make as a contribution toward the cost of those drifts. There's an analysis there of each of the mines. They're little slither mines. You know, many people, individuals that were mining along their little stretch feet, they called them. And the grades of those drifts are pretty continuous, and the continuity is good from north to south, around the 32 grams. The drifts weren't developed on all our property. It's about 65%. 35% doesn't have any drifts. So bear that in mind, only 65%. We have calculated that the total amount of drifts that were developed on that property is 200,000 metres, 200 kilometres of drives, 2 metres, 2.5 metres high, 2 metres wide. If you multiply that out with the specific gravity, that's 2.5 million tonnes would have come from those drifts. Interestingly, 2.3 million made the cut-off grade of 24 and was processed. So over 90% of all the drifts that were developed on our part of the Comstock lode had a grade of above 24 and actually averaged 32. How much of the 10, what the grade of the 10 we know is less than 24, but how much less we don't know. It might be nil, might be 23, but I would hasten to suggest that it would be somewhere in between and would be economic. Now, this long section, two-dimensional, doesn't actually show the extent of the drives, what's happening behind that line. This, on the right-hand side, does. So you can see that that little line represents a lot more drifting that was done behind that level. Now, this is an illustration. So you've got the one drift at the top here, 27 metres, 30, giving a 30-metre total, and then another drift down at the bottom. They left everything in between. Now, if they generated 2.3 million tonnes from 2 metre wide, 2.5 metre high, then what they left behind represents about 25 to 30 million tonnes. If you use the average grade of all the drifts, 22 grams, you're looking at 20 to 30 million ounces just there. We know that the ore widens up, the grade's a little less, but there's no way these old timers are going to mine more than 2 metres wide. If it didn't make 50 grams, they weren't interested. We believe that the width, the true width of the economic ore today is more likely to be 10 metres. And obviously at a lower grade, but maybe 8 to 10 grams. You're talking 50, 60 million ounces. That's the potential, that's what we're focused on. And those ounces do not account for the 10% that didn't make it to the surface. It doesn't include the 35% that isn't that was driven, and it doesn't include any depth extensions. As I say, 1,000 metres, that's what they developed down to. So the question is, well, surely with an important discovery such as Comstock and the high grades, this would have been drilled previously. That's one thing that really shocked and surprised me, unprecedented. Most of these other deposits around the world, like the Golden Mile, which is now the super pit, they've all been drilled. The answer is no. There's been a lot of drilling on that Lucerne by Comstock, but the main lode, very little. That is the extent of all the drilling ever done on what has produced some 19 million ounces of gold equivalent. You'll notice there's some deep holes. Most of these holes are 40 metres deep, that's all. Those deep holes, when we actually put it into 3D model with our advisors, MDA, it became clear that they were drilled 30 metres short of where the ore zone was, so they're completely ineffective. They might have not, they shouldn't have been drilled, basically. Of the short holes that were drilled, there's pretty spectacular results. In 1970, 6 metres at 23 grams, which is, you know, what we've been talking about, the 24 gram area. And in 84, they hit 11 metres at 33 grams of gold equivalent, and that's equivalent today. Nothing else. It's just unbelievable. So MDA put a plan together for a first year, $4 million, 72 holes, 21,000 metres to look at what the old timers left them, to confirm basically what the drifts and the evidence is showing us. Half of that is going to be budgeted for in the first 6 months. And after that drill program, we're looking at going to the TSXV. We're currently OTC, but we regard ourselves as private. 50% of the company is owned by management. The Occidental lode is another area that we've picked up. And as I say, this reminds me a lot of Fosterville. Fosterville produced 30,000 ounces at 40 grams a tonne back in the 1800s. Didn't hit the 50 grams that would be required at the time, therefore nothing happened. Of course, you've got a new group now in that has drilled it. They're looking at 2 million ounces defined as a reserve at 31 grams. This is very similar. A small amount of production happened just above or just below that D, 34,000 tonnes at 40 grams. Didn't hit the 50, so nothing was ever mined here. That was it. Down below where the C is owned by, just outside our block, is owned by an old man, Art Wilson, who drilled it. He's offered it to us, and last year he hit some big results, as can be shown here, ounce dirt. So again, potential for that is huge. Lucerne, I won't go on to it, but it was a means to an end, and it does have value. So we're raising 8.5 million at the moment. We're probably halfway through that. It's through a convertible note with interest at 12%. It's added to the note, converts at 18 cents. The interest effectively brings the price down to 13. Our current share price is 22. But I suggest that if we prove up 10, 20, 30 million ounces, our market cap will be something substantially higher than where it is today. I started a company called Lion Oil. We took that from 20 cents to $27. We sold it to Norilsk for $8 billion in 2007. I'm hoping that we can do better here. And this is all based on facts, evidence, and data, not hypothetical or wishful thinking. This is the capital structure. We've got 303 million shares on issue, fully diluted. Management have 50%. We've got some interesting investors. Ken Mullis, who runs Mullis Capital in Los Angeles. He's the one that actually introduced me to the Comstock lode. You've got Tuki Angus, Paul Stevens, Paul Matasek, and others that are beginning to come in now. But we've had to keep this quiet. We've kept a very low profile over the last 5, 6 years whilst we've been completing our strategy. And once we get ownership and drill, I think the results will show the significance of what is left at the Comstock lode. Thank you very much for your attention. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take some after or now. Or what